Welcome to the Stephen Mansfield audio podcast.
I want to answer some questions today about a podcast that I did some weeks ago entitled, Is Mormonism a Cult? And obviously I titled that to be a little bit incendiary, but in that podcast, I answered that question. That from a biblical or a Christian perspective, a cult, C-U-L-T, a cult, is an organization built on a perversion or distortion of traditional Christian Orthodox doctrine. And therefore, yes, Mormonism is without question a cult. Now, the reason that word stings so much with people is that the word cult normally is used to associate with David Koresh type movements in Waco or Jim Jones type cults in Ghana. And so I think that the word cult stings more at a popular level than it does at a theological level. But there's no question that technically speaking, from an Orthodox, creedal, historic Christian perspective, Mormonism is a cult. Well, lots of people, as you can imagine, asked questions about that. And one of those questions I've already answered. Can you explain this business of a cult? And I just want to say it one more time. When I use the word cult, I'm not using it in the sense that people are blindly following some single leader into weird practices and maybe criminal activity and ultimately drinking Kool-Aid and committing suicide. No, a cult, again, from a biblical, traditional perspective, is simply an organization built on a distortion of Christian doctrine. And the thing that intrigues me about me saying this, and people maybe having a hard time with it, is that Mormon history began as a repudiation of all Christian denominations at the time. I'm not saying anything against Mormonism to say that when Joseph Smith began to receive his revelations in the early 1800s, among those revelations was that no Christian denomination had it right. And so as a result, Mormonism saw itself as distinct, and it also saw itself as, the true church, so to speak. Well, but his doctrines were so novel, were so new, were such a departure from traditional Christianity that it really has to be said that there was no connection. I mean, it is so foreign to the traditional Roman Catholic Protestant worldview to say that a human being will one day be God. It is so foreign to say that Jesus and Lucifer were brothers. It is so foreign to say that the sacrifice of Jesus only introduces a man to God, but he has to work out by a system of works his salvation from that point on. That is so foreign to traditional Christian doctrine, it's not even funny. So there really is no question that Mormonism is, from any kind of Christian perspective, a cult. But just keep in mind that I'm not speaking of some single dynamic leader leading people into a suicide cult. The second question became, why is it that Mormonism sometimes inspires these baby farms that you see on television, meaning the kind of situation where you have a bunch of women who have given birth to many, many, many children, and they're all living in one communal situation, and the FBI raids them. We've seen that repeatedly in recent decades. There's a theology behind this that we need to understand, and I certainly think our friends in the FBI need to understand it before they go charging in. And that is that Mormons believe that those of us who now occupy human bodies were once pre-existent spirits, that you lived in a state they call pre-mortality. And so there are many, many what are sometimes called spirit babies waiting for human bodies, even right now, according to Mormons. And so the calling, the obligation, the duty upon Mormons is to have a lot of babies and thus allow these spirit babies, so to speak, for lack of a better term, to come to earth, occupy a human body, and live out the test, the sort of spiritual obstacle course that this life is, so they can qualify for their ultimate destiny of divinity. That explains why they do this. If you believe in polygamy, if you believe it's okay for a man to be married to a number of women, And if you believe in what I've just said about spirit babies and the obligation of a family to have as many babies as possible, it's very likely you're going to have a ranch in Utah or Texas where you have, 15 women mothering 50 children. That's very, very possible. It will look like a sex cult. It will look like some kind of an illegal white slaving kind of organization, but it's not. I'm not defending it. I'm just saying, bad theology is a horrible taskmaster, and these institutions are produced by the Mormons' very unique theology. So that explains why you have those, what some people call baby farms. And then the next question was about polygamy. Do the Mormons still believe in polygamy? No. Mormonism definitely taught polygamy from the beginning. Joseph Smith himself had many, many wives. It was something that was reclaimed from the Old Testament patriarchs. It was something they saw as being biblical in the early days of Mormonism. But Mormons essentially abandoned it when it became illegal. And I think they'll even admit this. It's not as though later their prophet said they had a revelation about one man, one wife, and polygamy not being moral. But the reality is that the U.S. government outlawed polygamy first in the famous Reynolds case. And then the Mormons changed afterwards. So most Mormons are no longer polygamous. For example, Mitt Romney, obviously married to one woman, and yet his great-grandfather was married to many women. That tells you how fast the change has been. Now, there are many splinter groups. There are many purist Mormons. There are many of what the press calls fundamentalist Mormons, which is a mixing of religious streams, but nevertheless, people who believe the Mormon Church compromised its calling when it turned away from polygamy, and therefore they practice polygamy, up in the mountains of Colorado and the backwoods of Utah and Nevada and places like that. And you hear about that from time to time. But all of that to say, polygamy, as far as mainstream Mormonism is concerned, has been outlawed. And then I'm asked often, is Mitt Romney serious about his Mormonism? Isn't he sort of like a liberal Protestant or kind of attend church once in a while kind of Christian? Isn't he sort of unserious about his Mormonism? And I assume people are asking me this question because they want to kind of get around the issue of Romney's Mormonism, given that he is likely to be the Republican nominee for president in 2012. Well, the fact is that Romney is very serious about his Mormonism. I've spent some time with him. I've spent some time with his wife. I've spent some time with his kids. I've studied him. Romney has been a Mormon pastor. They have different words for it, but essentially a Mormon pastor. He's been a bishop. He did the 2-year missionary effort, program that young Mormons have the opportunity to do. It profoundly changed him. He's a man who has counseled marriages according to Mormon doctrine. He has taught Mormonism and been the primary, what Protestants would call preacher or pastor or pulpit minister in a Mormon church. Romney's very serious. I spent time with his wife and probably more time than I've spent with Mr. Romney, just because of circumstances at banquets and things like that. And she's very serious Mormon. And so whatever you believe about Mitt Romney, you cannot sidestep the issue of his Mormonism because you believe he's just sort of light-handed about it. He's not. He's a deeply devoted, serious Mormon, and so are his children. And then one last thing, some people have asked me about the character of Joseph Smith. Wasn't he a liar? Wasn't he a crazy man? Wasn't he involved in all kinds of weird treasure hunts and so on? And I'm going to play a little game with you here because I'm going to say, you know what? You need to get the book that I'm currently writing called The Mormonization of America that'll be out in the summer of 2012. But I do want to sort of tease you a little bit or tantalize you a little bit by reading from one of my favorite books on the occult in America. It's by Mitch Horowitz, who is a publisher at Penguin. He was one of my publishers at Penguin. He's written a brilliant book, The Occult America, White House Seances, Ouija Circles, Masons, and the Secret History of Our Nation. I need to say quickly for those of you who are Christians and Jews and concerned about these things that Mitch is a man who advocates for the occult. He will not mind me saying that, of course, because he does. And by me advocating his book, I'm not advocating his version of the occult at all or anything about the occult. But he has written a brilliant book because he's invested himself in this field for years, and he describes extensively Joseph Smith. And one of the most interesting things about Joseph Smith is that Joseph Smith was deeply, deeply into the occult, as was his family. I'm just going to read a few sections so that to kind of pique your interest, and then I'm going to explore this more fully in the book. Here's a quote, page 22, Occult America by Mitch Horowitz. It says, as a teenage boy in the late 1810s and early 1820s, Joseph Smith of Palmyra was locally known as a clairvoyant guide who could track down hidden treasure using a seer stone, a smooth rock, variously opaque or marked with magic symbols, that he placed in his hat and gazed into to gain the power of second sight. Now, this is very typical of the writings about Joseph Smith in the early days. Let me read one more section. Magic and myth were part of the firmament of the Smith household. According to historian D. Michael Quinn in his monumental study, Early Mormonism and the Magic Worldview, Joseph Smith's family owned magical charms, divining rods, amulets, a ceremonial dagger inscribed with astrological symbols of Scorpio and seals of Mars, and parchments marked with occult signs and cryptograms popular in 18th and 19th century English and American folklore. It goes on and on and on. Now, if you think I'm intending a trashing of Mormonism, you'll just have to read the book to find out whether I do that or not. But Joseph Smith's moral character, something we can explore another time. The more important issue is that he was deeply, deeply involved in the occult. As a result of that, he became a high-level Mason in 24 hours. He was a man who was very much about treasure, very much about divining, very much about ancient myths and the occult and Freemasonry and symbols and astrology. And all of that got poured into Mormonism. And that's all I'll say. The rest I'll explore in the book. Mormonism's a fascinating subject. Don't be afraid of it. Study it, learn it. We are definitely living in a Mormon moment in America.
This Stephen Mansfield podcast was brought to you by the Mansfield Group. Find us at mansfieldgroup.com.